Welcome to the Superstar Communicator podcast. My name is Susan Heaton-Wright, a leading impact, speaking and communications expert. My aim is to show you how to make an impact so you will be heard, listened to and respected for career success. Listen weekly to the podcast and go to our website, superstarcommunicator.com. Hello everybody, this is Susan Heaton-Wright speaking from Superstar Communicator. Thank you for tuning in again today for the Superstar Communicator podcast. As I speak, it is Wimbledon, and although I cannot play tennis, I have no eye coordination. I am a huge fan of tennis and I've attended Wimbledon on a number of occasions. And one of the things that I find particularly fascinating is how people that are incredibly skilled either do really well, or alternatively, somebody is doing really well and all of a sudden they have a meltdown and they lose, or alternatively, somebody who's losing and they're able to turn it round and win a match. Now, during this particular podcast interview, we will be referring to a couple of examples of that. And I want you to look out over the time that Wimbledon's on of other examples of this. And one of the people that I was talking about was Naomi Osaka, who sadly pulled out of the French Open. And as I speak, she also pulled out of Wimbledon, which was a huge tragedy, really, because of her mental health. And I wish her every good vibe that she will be able to manage this better and manage the challenges she has when she's speaking to the press. But this is a really, really interesting interview with Sam. Sam is a sports and business psychologist. He works with lots of professional footballers so that they can manage their anxiety, can manage their mindset, so they can do the very best of their ability. And this is something that we can all learn from. We can have a fixed mindset, or we can have a growth mindset where we grab opportunities, we're not frightened of them, we manage the consequences of those. So this is really, really worthwhile listening to. And also remember that you can download the transcription. So enjoy. So Sam, thank you very much for coming on the Superstar Communicator podcast.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here and looking forward to the time we're about to share together.
Do you know, we met each other randomly on Lunch Club. Yeah, and when we had our conversation, I knew that you would be a fantastic guest.
Thank you. That's great. I really enjoyed meeting with you. So it's lovely to have been invited on. And yeah, as I said, I'm really looking forward to what we're going to talk about, which will be a good time together.
Now, you are obviously really, really interested in performance, but so am I. And I probably come from a different background than you, because my performance relates to being on the stage. And people often muddle the word performance. But I have often seen people, musicians or singers, who are absolutely brilliant, but they don't get to the top level. Maybe there's something that happens in auditions, or they get a series of poor performances and it impacts on their self-esteem. What is your take on that?
I agree with absolutely everything that you've just said. There are a lot of people, a lot of clients that I've got to work with that have had unbelievable skill sets or unbelievable abilities, and at times reach unbelievable heights of performance. But for some reason or another, they're either struggling right now to maintain high performance levels, or they're not able to perform at the levels that they once were. And that's really why and how I have a job, and why I get to do the work that I do with my clients, is because of those reasons. They know that they've got what they need to get them to that highest level. They've got the skills that they need, shall I say, but either something in their psychology, so their thought processes, or their emotions, as you just described, their self-esteem, is holding them back. It's limiting them and preventing them from getting back up to that sort of peak performance window that we're talking through there. So it's most definitely something that I see, and I see it unfortunately on a regular basis. But I'm really pleased to be able to say that some of the work that I get to do with my clients means that we can unlock those blocks and those challenges so we can get them back up to those performance levels that they want to.
And with people that are high performers, do they know exactly where they're going to go? Do they have a vision? Do they have a target?
The majority, and I'll be really transparent with you, Susan, the majority of the highest performers that I've ever worked with, the sort of elite level performers, both in the sporting world and in the business world, are the strongest characters with the strongest visions. They are very clear, very focused on exactly what it is that they want to achieve. And so that will more often than not be in place by the time that I start to work with them. They won't need me to necessarily help them clarify exactly where they want to go. It'll be much more about helping them reach that level, because they can very strongly see it in their minds, or they've got a strong visualization of what that will be.
And does that also involve step-by-steps?
Yeah, it can do, most definitely, because what will often happen is somebody will be very, very clear. So my sort of cognitive thinking clients, the people that are predominantly led by how their mindsets operate, they'll be very clear in their visuals and thought processes about what they want to achieve. But the reason why they need my support, or I will work with them, is because they're confused about how they're going to get there. And that's really the steps approach. So that's the finish line right at the end, or that's the top of your performance mountain. That's what you can see and you know what that is. But the confusion becomes around how they're then going to get there. And that's when I would then start to work with them in that coaching capacity or the performance psychology capacity, to then start putting into some accountability, steps and processes to help them get to the level that they want to get to.
Now, you mentioned that you work with elite athletes and business executives. I always find it very interesting that people fail to realize that musicians and performers also work to elite levels and quite often have the same mindset as well. Yeah. Why is it that people just seem to disregard this in musicians?
I don't know. I wonder at times, actually, Susan, if it falls more into that position of being quite a creative process or consideration. It's a creative space. But I completely agree with you. And I would be really interested to work with some more artistic clients and sort of maybe musicians as well, because what I think is happening is that we're all people. So whether it be an elite performer in sport, elite performer in business, or elite performer on the stage, we are all fundamentally human beings that are a combination of our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. So almost when I get to work with the clients that I work with at the moment, it's almost a little bit irrelevant what they do. It's ultimately always focused on who they are or where they are as a person right now, and ultimately where they want to be with their lives. Yeah. So I think it's a shame. And I agree with you. I do think that the arts can be disregarded at times. And I don't know if this is true. It's my hypothesis. I would say, I wonder if it's around the creativity perspective or consideration. But yeah, that just doesn't add up, because ultimately it's a human being who wants to perform is exactly the same as an athlete that wants to perform, or a business individual that wants to perform. So yeah.
Maybe there is this idea that it's just for fun. When in fact you could say that sport was just for fun. We know
definitely
all of this.
And I don't know, definitely, sorry to interrupt you, but the reason why I'm jumping in is because I'm so enthusiastic about your point, because the majority of the elite performers that I work with, particularly in the sporting world, let's take, for example, some of the professional footballers that I work with, when they're in their flow or when they're performing at that top level, it really is a creative space. They're ultimately not really thinking too much. They're not maybe feeling so much. They're just in their creative energy, doing it. It is what they feel is natural, just comes to them. And I imagine that's exactly the same for the creative arts too. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, what I've always experienced as a singer and as a speaker and trainer more recently is that I go into a performance zone, and afterwards, sometimes I can't remember what I've done, which sounds awful, Please, it's not a negative thing. It's all planned out, but because I'm in that performance zone, I'm just there in my zone of excellence.
Yes. Love
Does
that
that make
description.
sense? Am I doing something right?
It makes absolute sense. And it's something that I hear on a regular basis. But you know what, Susan, what you've just described can sometimes make it so confusing for my clients, because they'll say to me, Sam, I've performed at that level. I don't really remember what I did that day, or why it was so good, or how I managed to get myself up to that level. Can you help me find my way back? And so we've really got to dig a little bit deeper into what was happening or what was maybe going on around that time. But I completely connect to what you've said. And it's something that I've heard many times before, many times.
People are good. I mean, what I find is that my little voice is silenced, but then afterwards, because I think, what did I do? The little voice is questioning it, and maybe I should just push that little voice away to say, you know, it was fine.
Yes, that's what I would encourage you to do, most definitely. Don't allow those little voices. Again, that's another phrase or another term that I work with a lot with my clients. The little voices, and often appears, it starts off to appear as maybe a feeling of self-doubt or uncertainty, or maybe even a little bit of maybe negative inner critic at times too. Those little voices can become very destructive. So we want to be aware of them, as you're describing, be aware of them and try and push them away or deal with them and process them as quickly as possible. So the little voice doesn't then become a big voice.
Now, in the last few days, and we are recording this mid-June, there have been a couple of what I would call absolutely incredible performances where you might dispute this, but I believe that mindset and psychology was what moved them to the top level. Now, the first one was only earlier this week, and it was Claire Barrett Jones, who is an English mezzo soprano, an opera singer, and she got a call, 24 hours before competing in the Cardiff International Singer of the World. This is the top international international singing competition where the entire global industry is watching to see who's there, who's singing, who do we need to book. She had 24 hours notice of that. Now, she could have shown up and done her best, and everybody would have forgiven her because she was the substitute. But she sang unbelievably. And she won her heat. So she's in the final. She's in the final 5. Everybody will be watching. She will have work now. Her agent will be negotiating huge contracts for her even now. She said afterwards that she had dreamt of being in this competition and being in the 2 circles where you stand from being a teenager, and there she was. What are your comments about that?
I think I've got goosebumps as you're describing it to me, and I think for Claire that sounds like an amazing opportunity, but amazing ultimately that she performed at that level and was so successful. Thinking about it a little bit analytically to sort of maybe reflect on it, there's a part of me that wonders if actually Claire having such a short window of time to know that she was going to perform may have actually been a real benefit for her to reach that level of performance. And again, I don't know Claire, and I'm unsure about her situation or her processes, but I wonder if Claire would have reached the same level of performance if maybe she'd have had 24 days knowing that she was going to perform. Because potentially, as it happens with some of my clients, the longer that they know they've got that time before a performance window, the more some of those negative thoughts or negative emotions can creep in. Maybe because it was only a 24-hour window and because it was a short period of time, what was able to come forward was that positive visualization and that confidence that she has within herself to recognize, you know what, I've seen this in my mind for years. I've seen it since I was a teenager. I believe I can do it. Here's my window of opportunity. Let's go and perform. I wonder if actually it was a real benefit for her rather than being a challenge for her. And it feels like it really elevated and gave her that opportunity for success.
Because it could have played it either way, as you say. It could have been a massive advantage to her. She didn't have time to overthink. She arrived, had photos taken, was there rehearsing with the orchestra, finding a dress for her. On you go.
Nice. It may have been a really positive thing for her to have such a short window, the excitement, the adrenaline, the confidence that she knew what she was going to do, and therefore, as you say, not such a long period of time that other sort of negative energies could have crept in. Yeah, I feel excited for her. It feels
Yeah,
brilliant.
it'd be interesting. On Saturday, I think it's on BBC Two. Um, the final is there, and it's, you know, from the operatic world we all watch, and
Nice.
it's really interesting. And it, as you say, it's not necessarily the it's the best singer on the night, but they might not be the best singer ultimately. They are able to raise their game.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And it might be that actually there's a real momentum now that will happen
Yeah.
for Claire, and that will just elevate her up to the top. Yeah, fingers crossed. No, I wish you all the very best with that. That sounds great.
And then another thing that happened with, actually, on Sunday, I'm a great fan of tennis.
Okay.
Just to let people know, I cannot see the ball.
Okay.
Able to catch, hit, or throw.
Yeah.
You know, so spent 7 years at school hiding behind the tennis pavilion to avoid
Okay.
playing. You know, but I love watching tennis, and part of it is because of the mindset and the psychology.
Yeah.
Um, because when you reach a particular level, they are all unbelievable players who've
Yeah.
got. But why is it that one person does better than another? And Sunday's French Open was an example of that.
Yes.
The first two sets were lost by Djokovic. And my husband said, well, there's going to be a young one that joined. And I said, no, the game's not over until that lady's sung.
Yes. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Djokovic, I think he changed his shirt
Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
and he clawed back and he won another Grand Slam.
Yes. Yeah.
And people talk about the champion's mindset. Is this an example of that?
I believe that it is. I believe it's a really good example of it, because it's my belief, and I don't know Djokovic, I don't know his psychology,
No.
or I don't know his mindset, but it's my belief that there will have been an underlying psychological belief and a feeling of confidence that whilst that game was still open and it hadn't yet finished, he believed and he thought that he could still win. And that's my presumption from the work that I've done with the elite performers that I get to work with, that actually it doesn't matter a huge amount what's happening during the process, as long as there's still time to turn things around. There's that inner core belief or strength or mindset that will often carry those elite performers through. And I think what you've just described with Djokovic on Sunday is a really good example of that.
And do you think that hope is a great motivator?
I think it can be. One of the things that I often find is that my clients will gain confidence from thinking about or reliving and revisiting experiences where they have achieved or they have performed well.
Right.
So they shift the energy away from hoping to perform or hoping that things will turn out well. And in those moments where maybe it is 2 sets into the match and you're 2 sets down, it's a revisiting of, well, I've been in this situation before, or I've prepared for this situation before, or okay, I've lost 2 sets, but there's still 3 sets available to me. And I know that I've got the ability to win. And so I don't know whether it was his psychological process that kicked into his mindset, or whether it was an emotional confidence and feelings that kicked in, some adrenaline and excitement. I don't know. It was maybe a combination of both. But that's my deepest belief, is that he will have had some inner strength and confidence, and that would have transitioned into his mindset that would have said, there is still time left, let's go and do this. And I believe that's what would have turned it around for him on Sunday.
Now, I'm going to be a little bit cynical about sports psychology. I hope
Okay.
you don't mind. Recently, in the last few months in the press, there have been situations where um, elite footballers have said that they've worked with sports psychologists and they find it very difficult when they don't win, because they have been trained to win at all costs. And reality is that we don't always win. There
Yeah.
might be a mistake. There might be somebody better than us. It might be a situation that's just not right for us. How do you deal with that?
Well, I'm one of the performance psychologists that's out there, Susan, that would strongly disagree with that being an approach and an approach to take with particularly athletes, because let's take example my group of professional footballers. They're often playing on such a frequent basis. It could be Saturday to Saturday, or sometimes Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. There are so many games and so many fixtures that they go through when they're in their window of competing, that actually it's very unlikely that they're going to win every single game. So if the sports psychologist is supporting them and building them towards the winning mindset all of the time, then what they're doing is missing out on this huge opportunity to work on things like resilience for when those individual players actually lose or draw, or the team might still win, but they themselves feel like they didn't perform at the level that they wanted to. And so for me, my approach, and that's not to discredit other sports psychologists or other performance psychologists, but my approach is always about thinking about the holistic picture, the athlete or the business person as a whole. Who are they right now? Where are they right now regarding their feelings, their thoughts, their behaviors and actions? And where do they want to be? Not purely outcome focused. So where do you want to be as a winner? Winning is part of the process. And more often than not, that will be a really significant driver. And yes, the majority of the time they do win, but we've got to make sure that it always remains balanced and wider in its perspective, because it would be great to have athletes that could win every single time, but the reality is they won't. And so what happens when they don't win, or when a business client of mine doesn't land that deal or the new contract, or they don't achieve the financial markers that they want to within their business growth and development? It's about recognizing that that might happen and developing their skills, their mindsets and their emotional reactions for those periods of times to make sure that then they grow and flourish into the performers that they want to be.
So I totally agree with you on that, and I hope I didn't put you on the spot professionally.
No, not at all, not at all.
I always have a laugh when governments or businesses say, when the whatever hits the fan, we will learn from this. Do you believe them, or is there a proper process where they grow?
So for me, Susan, it's one of the top tips actually that I was going to share later, but it feels appropriate to bring it in now. And one of the things that I always encourage my clients to have is a learning growth mindset. So there's a lot of research out there at the moment that talks about the growth and fixed mindsets. And really, it's ultimately about embedding and enhancing that growth mindset as much as possible. One of the phrases that gets bandied around a lot within sport is about winning and learning, not winning and losing. So it's about trying to find the learning opportunities through absolutely every situation, whether that be because you've won the game or lost the game, or you've performed well or you haven't, that you recognize that there's still learning and reflection opportunities to take through it. So one of the things that I often talk to my clients about is about making sure that they're aware of what's gone on, and they then start to recognize that there are learnings that can be taken from it, but very quickly accept what's happened, accept the learnings, and then have the ability to move forward. Particularly if, for example, they're in a sport like golfers. I've got a golfer that I can share with you, a golfing client that I once worked with. And golfers, he's a pro golfer, and on average, he would take about 70 shots around. Okay. And when he started to work with me, he was recognizing that about 50 to 55 of those shots in a round maybe weren't perfect or exactly where he wanted them to be. 10 to 15 were, but about 50, 55 weren't out of the 70. And he was recognizing that his little negative inner critic voice was saying things like, that's not good enough, or you should have done better there. And can you imagine how he was psychologically impacted by that and emotionally impacted on that by a 4-hour round, 70 shots later, 50 times saying to himself in that time, you're not good enough, that wasn't right, you need to do more. And so what we started to work on with him was the same mentality. It's awareness. Okay, you've taken that shot, what happened? How did you feel and what was the outcome? Learn from it. What do you maybe need to do differently? Do you need to adjust your stance, or do you need to maybe think slightly differently as you approach the shot? Okay, accept that. Accept that was what happened, and accept that's what you're going to do differently next time, and then move on. And so what we then started to see was that every sort of 3 to 4 minutes, if he was adopting my new technique, he was able to recharge his energy and refocus himself to then perform better. But the biggest challenge that I often face with all of this is when people say that they're going to learn from situations, is sometimes they can get bogged down in the learning and forget to accept, implement, and move on. So sometimes I'll work with clients who will say things like, Sam, I feel very, very stuck. And they'll often get stuck behind the learnings or the disappointments or the frustrations of the situation, rather than being very open-minded and saying, okay, that was what happened. This is what I'm going to learn from it. But let's accept and move on. Otherwise, we can just get trapped in the learning phase or the too strong reflective phase. So for me, it's quite a long process that we have to start working people through. But I think learning can happen, but it's very much then about what comes next.
How you implement that learning.
Accept, implement, and move on. It's so important. So important.
Really, really interesting. Because obviously when I was a musician, I was still in what we call now musicians the old school style of study. And, there were master classes I attended, even at very prestigious places like the Britten Peers School, where some of the tutors, they just wanted to get somebody to cry every session, and everybody was terrified.
Yeah.
I can see from your face that you're just horrified.
Yeah.
And certainly when I did recitals at music college, as part of the learning process, my teacher at the time would run round, and as I was coming off stage, would wave. Now, I've got 32 things you got wrong there.
Wow.
I know, how wrong this is. But this was the style of learning. And even now, there are people I know that are my age, even slightly younger, who were so distressed and so stressed at music college. It was such a negative, stressful situation. They had, psychological illnesses the day they left. They didn't have those before. And people can be very negative rather than thinking positively and then wanting to work on.
Yes.
What's your thought about when you give feedback?
Well, it really depends on the individual, because one of the things that I think is really significant, if I can use your example to make it really applicable to everybody that's listening. So your tutor's approach of here's 32 things that you got wrong is one approach. One of the other approaches that I would strongly encourage them to have taken or to consider taking is actually to get alongside you after your performance in that feedback space. I would encourage it to be seen as feedback and sort of communication rather than here's some criticism or some critical feedback for you. And in that space, the first question for me, or the most powerful question for me, would be to ask you, Susan, how you felt you performed. So you're coming off stage. How did you feel that performance went? What do you feel maybe went well? And what do you feel maybe could be improved? And it's my belief and it's my experience from the majority of elite performers that I get to work with, they'll more often than not see the things that could have been improved. And at times, what they actually need is support in seeing the things that went well.
Yes.
Because what can very quickly happen is people can get out of balance. It can lead to the higher the performance levels you reach, the more critical of yourself you become. And so what can then actually be more beneficial is not a tutor that says, oh, here's another 32 things you got wrong, because you might already have 5 or 10 things in your own head. So then you're carrying all of that negativity. So sometimes it can be really important when we think about feedback and when we think about that opportunity for reflection after performances, is actually to do it in a rounded way. And it can be very simple as, how did you feel it went as the performer? What do you feel were your strengths? What do you feel went really well? And then also what do you think could be improved if you were to do it next time? And it's a very simple format. It's 3 questions, but it leads into a really lovely open debate rather than criticism and negativity.
And do you think that immediately after you've performed is the right time to do feedback, or to wait until after you've had a shower, perhaps the day? Well done, we'll talk about this on Monday.
Yeah, so I'm smiling, Susan, as you're talking, because I've got a couple of different people in my mind, some of my clients in my mind. There are some clients that I work with need it immediately.
Right.
They need to be told straight away. And they're really looking for, was it good or was it bad? Did you think I did well, or did you think I could have done better? I've got other clients that need the space. They don't even want to talk about the sport or the business deal or anything related to what they've just gone through in that performance window. They need the space and time themselves to reflect. So it's very much dependent on the individual. Now that can be a challenge if you've got a tutor like you've described, whose energy is, I must tell them straight away. Because for some of their performers, that might be a really good thing. It helps them calm down after a performance to know what they've done well and what they can do better next time. But for other performers, giving them that feedback straight away could be really destructive and actually really negative for them. So sometimes it's about asking the performer, okay, let's talk about your performance, let's reflect on it, but when would be a good time for us to do that? Do you want to do it now, straight away, or should we wait a little while? And
Yeah.
more often than not, people will be quite aware of what they need. Some will say, straight away, tell me now, what did you think? And others will need some more space and time to reflect themselves before they're ready to be able to hear somebody else's input.
Oh, that's really useful to know, because I have to be honest. I'm being honest here on the podcast, that certainly from my singing performances, it did impact me. I got more critical as I became more successful, and I'm sure it was related to that.
Yes, it wouldn't surprise me, Susan, if that was your experience, if you were to say that as you just have, because that's also something that I see in lots of my other clients too. Yeah.
Yes. Now, talking about feedback after performance, in the
Mm.
news over the last month was about Naomi Osaka, who
Mm.
said that she didn't want to have press interviews afterwards, which
Yeah.
I believe can be pretty ruthless
Mm.
at a time when you might want to reflect quietly or just talk to your coach. You're expected to perform in another way. You're a sports person, but you have to perform in another way. And
Yeah.
some of the press can be ruthless.
Yes. Yeah, they can. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I blogged about it. What's your thought about that?
I really respect her for coming
Yeah,
out and taking such a strong stance. So I think that's the first thing to say. And I think it's brilliant that she's got
definitely.
the self-awareness to recognize that that was actually becoming very detrimental to her mental health and well-being, so her core, but also having then a negative impact on her performance levels too. So that for me is the first step. But I think the second step into this discussion is it opens up the wider debate about
Yes.
who really is in control or who has the power when it comes to things like these sporting events. There is an expectation placed on some athletes that they are expected to perform, as you say, not only on the court or on the field or in the pitch, but they're also expected to perform in the media duties after as well. And for some of them, that is not a positive thing, or that's not a good thing for them to do either. However, because of the contracts that they sign, or because of the organizations that are funding these formats or these competitions, it can then throw up some big debates. And ultimately, it led to her withdrawing from the tournament. So as a tennis performer, she didn't get to perform on the tennis court because of her choice to not perform in front of the media. And I think that this is now a wider debate. And I think it's happening to a certain extent with the Euros, with some of the post-match interviews that are happening there, with some of the sponsors that are involved, some of the footballers' opinions on the sponsors that are presenting bottles, for example, on the tables of the interviews. So yeah, I think Naomi, and I think what's happening as well within the Euros is going to start to really widen this debate about how much expectation are placed on these athletes to not just perform in their sport, but also perform after. And ultimately, who has the power and control and choice over whether that's a good thing for them or not a good thing for them? Because if Naomi decides she doesn't want to do any media in the future, does that mean she can't perform anymore in the sport that she loves?
Yeah.
It's a grey area for me, and it's a big debate that I think we're only really just starting. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
That's interesting. I agree totally with you. I mean, I
Mm.
felt that maybe we have too much expectation on sports people who have literally just come off performing,
Mm.
and they're going to
Yeah.
be tired. They might want to have a shower, have
Mm.
something to eat. They might be, they might be exhausted. They might be really hungry. They might be
Yeah.
dehydrated. All of those things that are put you into a very vulnerable emotional state.
Mm.
Um,
Definitely.
and maybe if there was a break of even 30 minutes to allow people to, rebalance,
Mm.
um, and also to have somebody there emceeing and saying, no, we're not having that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I think.
think, I feel it could really, really help the whole
Yeah.
situation.
I think so too, and I think as you've just described there, the whole situation needs to be looked at now, rather than just being singled out individual athletes that are
Yes,
maybe pushing against the system. I think the system needs to be
yes,
discussed, explored, scrutinized, and then new decisions and outcomes reached, rather than just, oh, an individual athlete is going to be judged as they're a problem, or they're a troublemaker,
yes,
or they don't fancy it. I think it needs to be a wider discussion than that, than just individuals sort of outlined. Yeah.
Now, we've talked a lot about athletes.
Mm.
Do you have any success stories that you would be able to share with us about business people that have done really well as a result of your work?
Yeah, most definitely. The challenge with me sharing case studies and examples is the confidentiality that obviously abides in my work.
I
But
have
I'm very
the same thing.
most definitely. But I'm very happy to share an example of a client that I
Again,
work with. Yeah, no, most definitely. So one of the examples that I'd like to give is the MD of an organization that was a middle-aged man. He'd been in his career and he'd been in his career for about 20 to 25 years. And he'd been running his own business for about 10 years or so. And what had started to happen was the growth and the development of the company, the organization that had initially been really good in its growth and the momentum energy had been really, really high, had just started to stall. And what that created for him was a huge level of self-doubt, not only in himself as the leader of the organization, but actually about what the organization's purpose, function, and actually the direction of the organization too. And so what I got to work with was the individual who's doubting himself, and I got to then deal with then I got to support the MD, the owner of the organization, that's then planning strategically about what it is that the business needs to do. And so it was really powerful at times, Susan, to have those sessions with him, because sometimes it would be a case of saying, okay, whose agenda are we following today? Is it about your self-confidence, your self-belief, and you starting to reconnect to that positive energy within yourself? Or are we actually talking about you being more clearer and having that wider perspective on what it is that the company needs to do? So is it a you thing that you need to do, think about or feel about or act differently? Or is it something that the company needs to think about, feel about or act differently? And so I got to work with that individual for about 2.5 years. It's been a long time piece of work. We've mixed up the sort of schedule. So we would see each other weekly at times and then monthly for other sort of review periods at times. But that was a really powerful case study I'd like to share, because what that client gave me was the opportunity to work with both sides of the
yes,
business.
yes.
Got to deal with the person that's driving and also then the wider organization itself, because it would be absolutely appropriate for me as his coach to say, okay, you're now more confident and you're now believing more in yourself, off you go. But that didn't necessarily translate then into how he was performing within the business, because the business was established. It had been a successful business. So it itself had created its own routines and habits. And so if he was to go back into them very quickly, those habits that he's installed through our work as an individual might have been rejected or pushed back against by this company and the organization that he was the top of. So it was a really beautiful piece of work that we got to do together, and a really great client relationship that I got to share, because ultimately he was willing to be so open, be willing to take on board the impact and some of the challenging questions that I ask. Susan, I'm very direct with some of my clients to really try and get them to understand themselves better and what it is that they want to do or they need to do to move themselves forward. And so out of that came this fantastic journey that we went on together, from a company and organization that was stuck and a little bit lost and wasn't really sure of its identity, but also an individual who happened to be the MD who was stuck, lost, and a little bit sure about his identity. So it was a really beautiful piece of work, and a great journey that I got to go on with him.
And what a fantastic case study. And listeners, it might be worthwhile thinking about, if you're feeling stuck, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, are you impacting your self-doubt or concerns that you have in your business as well?
Definitely. And I think it can happen, particularly in the case study that I've just shared, because initially entrepreneurs, business owners, business leaders, it's a new idea, it's a new business, it's great. They put all of this energy and belief into it. There's some success, the business grows, it develops. There's even more confidence. There's great, this feels like a brilliant place to be. Let's get more people on board. Let's get more clients. Let's do this. And then there's that stagnant space, or that stalling of that energy. And then it can be really, really detrimental to both the individuals and the organization if it's not dealt with and addressed. So I always give respect to my clients that reach out and make contact with me to say, look, I think I need some support. I think the business needs some support. But ultimately, it's about recognizing it and then doing something about it. Because the reality is, if he hadn't have done that, he would now be in a much worse place himself and the business would be too. So yeah, I really support you, Susan, in saying that the clients and people just need to be aware and then reach out for the support when they need it.
Oh, brilliant. Now, as my listeners know, I always ask my guests 3 top tips. Now, for you,
Okay.
it's related to performance psychology, isn't it?
Yeah, so they're all related. Sorry, Susan. They're all related to performance psychology, mindset, those sorts of things. So the first one I know that I shared with you guys a few moments ago was about not falling into the trap of thinking that life and events and performance windows are win and lose, but it's that growth mindset, win and learn. And making sure that when you're learning, that you don't get stuck in the learnings and drag yourselves down into that critical feedback, that you reflect, you see what could have maybe been improved, you see also what you did well, learn from both of those, accept them, and then move on. And hopefully that will then carry forward into the next period of performance or opportunity for performance. So that's number one. Number two is about knowing where it is that you're heading, or knowing what your goals are. And so a way of making that really relatable is about saying to my clients, right, what is the performance window that we're working towards? Where is it that you want to end up? And then it's always vital that we follow up the where are you going with the why are you going there. So that's my top tip number two. There'll be people who are listening to this pod that are saying, oh yeah, no, I already know where I'm going. I already know what I want to do, or what I want to achieve, or what my goals are. That's brilliant. That's the first step. But you must always follow that up with the why. Because when I work with clients and we can establish the why, it gives them greater sense of meaning, purpose, and will ultimately, in my experience, lead them to greater levels of motivation to reach that place that they know they want to reach. So that's my top tip number two. And then top tip number three for me, it goes back to what I solely in my core believe, Susan, and that is for anybody to perform at the levels that they want to, they need to feel, think, and behave their way there. So some people are more cognitively led than others, but you could have the strongest mindset in the world. You could be psychologically very focused. But if at times you get emotionally stressed or overwhelmed or consumed by pressure, that will impact on your ability to perform. And the opposite is true. Some of my clients don't want to think about things. They just love to feel confident, feel the energy, feel like they're in their flow. But actually, if they start to get some negative inner thoughts about maybe not being good enough or starting to doubt themselves, that will also impact on their ability to perform. So my third and final tip is making sure that you give respect to that balance. Make sure that you're feeling, thinking, and behaving your way to your performance, because ultimately it needs to be in balance for you to be able to reach that place.
Oh, absolutely fantastic tips. And remember that this particular podcast is transcribed, that we do have some listeners who are hard of hearing, so I want to make sure that it's inclusive for them. But it might be worthwhile downloading the transcription, because these tips are gold dust.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's been brilliant to share time with you. It's been such a good conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
How can listeners contact you? Because I'm sure that they want to know more about your work.
Yeah, please do. So there's a variety of different channels they can reach me on. So there's my website, so www.sambishopcoaching.com. There's also the opportunity to find me on LinkedIn, and again, simply by searching Sam Bishop Coaching. And my Instagram handle is Sam Bishop Coaching too. So website, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Please find me on those channels and make contact with me. It'd be great to hear from you.
Brilliant. So the Instagram was Sam Bishop
Coaching.
Coaching too.
Sorry, no, just Sam Bishop Coaching.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's okay. So sorry, I meant to say it's Sam Bishop Coaching too as well. So yeah, so all of my channels just fall under that. So just straightforward Sam Bishop Coaching, website, LinkedIn, and also on Instagram.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. This has been a brilliant interview, and I'm absolutely sure that listeners are going to find this of huge value.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the space to come on and talk and share a little bit more about what I do. And I hope it's been really beneficial. But yeah, no, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, listeners. Until next time, this is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator. So I hope you enjoyed that interview. Absolutely fascinating stuff. And keep your eyes open both to when people are doing really well and those people that are doing well and suddenly they crash and burn, don't they? and really enjoy. And if you want to have more information about Superstar Communicator, why not grab our 10 top tips to being a superstar communicator? And it is superstarcommunicator.com/10 top tips. And I'll put the link in the details. So until next time, thank you for listening. Take care. You have been listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and on apps. Please contact us if you want to discuss any topic, could suggest a topic for us to include, or a guest who could come onto the podcast. Go to superstarcommunicator.com.